As a child, I battled depression to the point where when I was 18, I attempted suicide. By the time of my mid to late 30s, when the depression came back, and despite external success, I was miserable. The suicidal feelings came back, and I fortunately made two decisions that forever changed my life. The first was I decided not to go through with the feelings. And second, I decided I needed to leave the venture capital business. Everything good that I do in the world today stems from those two decisions.
So I was reading your bio, Jerry. You're an ex-private equity guy and really sort of got into leadership. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, what would you like to know about the transition, or what would be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, kind of wherever you wanted to take it. I mean, okay, so yeah, let's go for the transition. Sort of what was the catalyst for the transition?
Depression,
Okay.
midlife crisis. I became a VC when I was 30 years old.
Right.
And I joined first one firm, and then I started another firm right at the beginning of the first wave of internet investing.
Mm-hmm.
And my firm, the firm I co-founded with Fred Wilson, Flatiron Partners, was kind of touched by gold. I mean, everything we touched became successful. And then everything we touched became crap. And the crisis that began in 2000, 2001 started to sort of coincide with an interior existential crisis that had been building for a long time. And as a child, I battled depression to the point where when I was 18, I attempted suicide. And so by the time of my mid to late 30s, when the depression came back, and despite the external success, I was miserable inside. The suicidal feelings came back, and I fortunately made two decisions that forever changed my life. The first was I decided not to go through with the feelings. And second, I decided I needed to leave the venture capital business. And everything good that I do in the world today stems from those two decisions.
Right. You know that saying, money doesn't buy happiness, huh? You are the definition of the example. So what was it about the VC industry or the business? Was it just like it was a 24/7 lifestyle? Was it the pressure? Was it the people? Tell me a little bit about that.
It was none of those things.
Okay.
As I detail in my first book, Reboot, as a boy, I grew up with enormous violence and poverty. And I had a mentally ill mother, and my father's mental illness was manifested in depression and alcoholism. And the only place of safety for me was really on a consistent basis was my grandparents' house and my mother's parents. And my grandfather, Dominic Guido, seemed to have it all figured out. I mean, he was an entrepreneur. He was an Iceman from southern Italy, sixth grade education. And as I chronicle, he always seemed to have enough. And it was manifested in the fact that there was this tin in the green pantry outside of their kitchen that had lemon drops.
Mm-hmm.
And in my 30s, um, after struggling mightily um, with these feelings, I was in a therapy session, and my therapist said to me, after a particularly bad period, um, "What's it going to take, Jerry?"
Mm-hmm.
And when I responded with Bill Gates, and I realized that what I was saying was that I was chasing this ephemeral dream of having enough lemon drops to feel safe, I knew I needed to make a change. So it wasn't the industry per se.
Right.
I still
Right.
have incredible friends in the industry and they've done phenomenal stuff. And I still hang around the hoop, if you
Mm-hmm.
will.
Right.
But um, it was really the fact that who I was on the inside was
Mm-hmm.
out of alignment with who I was being on the
On
outside.
the outside. Yeah. And you could only hold that together for so long before the cracks start to seep through, right? I mean, it becomes
Exactly.
the analogy of the dam, right? You're sticking one finger in a hole, another finger in a hole, another finger in a hole, a toe in the hole. Eventually you're out of fingers, you're out of toes.
And you're
And
overwhelmed with the water.
correct, correct, correct. Do you have siblings, by the way? Or were you
I
an only
do.
child?
No, I'm number 6 of 7.
Wow. Wow, that's a big family. So, in regard to your siblings, that growing up in the same environment, were they also affected, or have they been affected by things like mental health, depression? Um,
Absolutely.
any severe cases or any severe stories?
Well, that's their stories to share, but what I will say is that we have all been affected.
Mm,
And I often liken the group of us, we're all still alive, which is great.
yeah,
I'm
that's good.
second youngest, but we were all kind of like a band of feral cats.
Mm,
We could fight with each other, but don't you dare try to get in.
mm,
And don't you dare try to attack the group.
mhm,
Um, and we all have adapted in different ways.
mhm,
Um, and I'm probably the one who's most outwardly outspoken about it and outwardly
mhm.
willing to share some of those experiences. But I'll tell you this: after my first book came out, Reboot, in 2019, before it officially was done, I sent a PDF to my siblings to sort of say, "Hey, I'm telling
What do
some
you
truthful
think?
stories." Yeah.
Yeah.
And one brother said to me with a lot of tears, "Thank you for telling our story so well."
Mm,
And
mm,
that was incredibly rewarding.
yeah. You know, my father dealt with depression. His was more alcoholism wasn't there, but it was more in like manic behavior, right? Like when he was
Mm,
good, he was good. When he was bad, he was fucking bad.
mm,
Um, and you know, lived it firsthand. And you know, the joke about my father was he finally figured out from a therapy and a medication standpoint in his 50s, right?
mhm.
Sort of how to balance out. He was never suicidal. His depression wasn't suicidal. His depression um, was just low, right? Um, and
How
he
did
got
it
into
affect
sort.
you?
Oh, it was a fucking nightmare growing up. You know, I thought for a long time I thought I was special. I grew up with this fucking crazy father and like it was super intense. And, you know, I think when we look at the fractured relationships within my family, even though we are still a family and close, and my father passed away, by the way, at 60. So that's the other half of the story, which,
Mine passed at 67, but keep going.
yeah. So, you know, all of a sudden, like siblings and family, we came together because forever it was always as long as he was around, it was what mood is he in? Is he in a good mood
Mhm.
today? Cool. And you know, on the other side of that, like you would see him, and I tell the story all the time, you would see him really operate so well with friends and in society. And it was just like, we saw behind the curtains, which was just
Mhm.
chaos. Um, Took a long time to sort of heal some of those wounds and deal with them. I don't know if my sister fully has.
Mhm.
I definitely don't think my brother has.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it was intense. But he got into his medication, and he was balanced. And the joke became, as I started to say, I wonder what he would have been like if he started this type of therapy and medication when he was 20, right? Um, because again, the extreme behaviors was anger and aggression, or just complete lowness, and somewhere in the middle, right, was the happiness. So I get it. And there's a guy by the name of Frank King. I met him in one of these groups I was part of earlier this year. He is a suicidal expert,
Mhm.
and does a lot of he speaks in suicide prevention now,
Mhm.
and runs a lot of sort of support groups, and just a wicked dude and an author. And he's done TED Talks, and he's this really sort of weird, dry, kind of sarcastic kind of personality. And his story is so deep. And he says, listen, my suicidal thoughts are like this: when I'm faced with stress, I immediately go into three thoughts. First, kill myself. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, I get a flat tire on the road. My first thought is, fuck it, kill myself. Second thought is, don't deal with it. Just leave the car and walk away. And then it's the third thought of like, okay, let me call AAA and start to get it managed. Anyway, he talks a lot about, um,
I relate to
um,
everything you just said that he says, but keep
yeah,
going.
right. So, which is, it's like it's an ongoing battle, or maybe battle's the wrong word. It's an ongoing practice and exercise to manage this stuff. It's like if you stop working out, you're going to get
Mhm.
weaker. It's going to hit you harder, right? So it's a forever thing, and it's really about taking advantage of the tools of the community. Community is huge, right?
Mhm.
Um, Isolation is probably one of the worst things for us as personalities, but specifically you as well, which is interesting because you're a writer, right? So it's a
Well,
very
well, let me respond to that. The practice of being with the feelings has gotten easier and easier for me,
right, as it
and
should.
so it's still rare at this point that those
Hmm.
thoughts come up. In part because after turning 38 and after making that choice,
Hmm.
I went in and did a tremendous amount of work. I was in psychoanalysis previously, and I continue to be in psychoanalysis.
Hmm.
And so I still have a relationship, if you will, with those dark feelings.
Hmm.
Um, but one of the things that nourishes me is solitude.
Really? Wow, interesting.
Well, so you started to talk about being a writer and
Hmm.
being now I make a profound distinction between solitude and loneliness, right?
Yeah.
I'm married to someone who shares my desire for solitude
Hmm.
and shares the same need to go quiet.
Hmm.
And so I've written now my second book, and in both cases, the books were written in a sense with me in that solitary space where I'm really just battling the blank page. But especially with Reunion, the second book, I could
Hmm.
look up and look out, and I said, I live in Colorado. We live on a farm, and my wife Allie has three horses. And from my office window, I look to my right and I can watch her in the barn. So I'm not
Hmm.
alone.
Yeah.
She'll come in and say, "Are we a good writer today?" Yeah,
Yeah.
today we're a good writer. No, no, no. Today we were a shitty writer. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Anyway,
cool.
I've interrupted you.
Well, no, that's great. I think what you just defined is the difference between solitude and isolation.
Mhm.
And that, there's an awesome author. I talk a lot about her in my training, Susan Cain. She wrote a book called
Uh-huh.
Quiet, right?
I love
Um,
that book.
It's an excellent book, and if you're an extroverted personality, it helps you understand what introversion really is, and just what you described. It becomes a frequency that I operate best at. Right? It doesn't
Hmm.
mean that we don't engage with people in relationships. We do it differently, right?
Hmm.
And if you're an introvert, right, or more of a quiet in quotations personality,
Hmm.
um, what are the benefits of that? One of the models I teach, so the work I do around leadership is really based on psychology. So we look at things
Hmm.
like your personality and not the light personality, not the fun stuff like, oh, I'm a parrot and I'm an owl. Like really,
Hmm.
what is the structure of your personality and where did these behaviors and emotions come from, and why do you operate and behave the way you do? And there's a little bit of the conversation of nature and nurture, right? So the personality or the genetic profile that we're born with, and then depending on the environment we're raised in, right, really affects how we develop as that personality. And one of the sides of our personality is something called the withdrawn child, or the
Hmm.
quiet child, the private child. And the positive aspects of the withdrawn child is reflection, introspection, and you start to see different sort of activities that are really um, um, benefited by the withdrawn child state of your personality. Writing, journaling, even running as a like an or a cyclist, like as an individual rider or runner by yourself, earphones in, right? There's this guy, Colin O'Brady. He did something called man hauling across Antarctica. I had him on the
Hmm.
show earlier this year. 375 pound sled that you pull, and it was a race between him and this other guy. Anyway, fast forward, he won. And one of the books that he came out, or his latest book, is called The 12-Hour Walk. And the concept of it is you go and walk in silence for 12 hours, right? And it's a meditative experience. So cool. Well, listen, Jerry, first, welcome to the show, by the way. We're well into it. um, and sharing your story. I think it's always really interesting to really gain the insight and understand who the person is behind some of these books, right? And where it comes from. And I like the fact that no, like it was interesting that you clarified when I said, was it the industry that just fucked you up, right? Just I'm thinking of like Wolf of Wall Street, right? Like crazy cocaine and drinking and 24/7 and money flying everywhere and high pressure sales, and eventually it's just you don't get restoration from that. You don't get rest from that environment, so it just wears you down. But you went into that with the personality and then cope through it, right? Which must have been its own exercise in itself. And
Well, to be
yeah,
clear, that was not my experience. I was not
no, I
hanging out
know.
with wolves of Wall Street.
No, I know. It's funny how
Yeah.
we generate our perceptions, right? I read your bio, I see VC, and like, okay,
Mhm.
private equity. Here's an old cat
I think
from
I know
from.
this guy. Yeah.
Think I know this guy. We kind of see it. And then you said, look, with flat iron, we were cranking it. It's just success after success after success. So, question: why would you leave things like that? But your life and your mental health is so important. I've wrecked my. This has been a rough year for me on my physical health. So I broke my knee in March, which took me out for 4 months. After that, the leg wasn't working as properly, which contributes to now my back going and then the sciatica. So it's just been this crazy year of physically trying to rebuild and get stronger and stuff. And I always relate this, like physical health is hard enough to gain back, right? Mental health is 10 times harder. So instead of losing it, well, instead of wearing yourself down, really, the little small things that we put in place now are even more important, right? So with that being said, let's jump onto your latest book. Talk to me about some of the work that you're doing now. So you're doing a lot of work in leadership and sort of the if I paraphrase the title, which is leadership and the longing to belong, right?
Hmm.
Reunion. This is your latest book, which is available to or just recently launched, November
Hmm.
14th. How did
Hmm.
it go?
Well, it's a national bestseller, so we're doing well.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
I think that, first of all, I want to circle back to the work that you do
Mhm.
and why I was so taken by your hat. So, the phrase that I coined maybe about a dozen years ago, is that better humans make better leaders.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
look at this.
I, I am when I left my work as a VC, I kind of wandered into the desert of my own midlife.
Mhm.
And I started to try to, you know, I began studying Buddhism. And I often liken that period to at the end, many people are familiar with the Buddhist story, but there's this period at the end of his wanderings in the forest where, and I'm from Brooklyn, so trigger warning, I'm about to curse. There's this image I have of him basically being frustrated because nothing he was trying would work. And so I have this image of him sitting down under a tree, the Bodhi tree, and saying, fuck it. I'm just going to sit here until I figure it out. And of course, what he figured out were the Four Noble Truths. I felt that that period, my early 40s, was analogous to that period. And rather than sitting under the Bodhi tree, I would sit in the pool house in my house, in my family, and I would pretend to be writing a novel about a man in midlife crisis. But what I was really doing was trying to figure out me.
Mm.
Now, I really relate to some of the things that you describe in my language because many of the people I work with are in the tech industry. I would use the analogy of our internal belief systems, the survival strategies we developed as children. I use the analogy of subroutines. Now, a subroutine is the programming that sits beneath the application. So when you are interacting with your computer, you don't see the subroutine.
Right.
The subroutine tells the hunk of metal, you're a computer. This is what you do. Okay. And the truth is, I think that as part of our survival strategy, you could
Mhm.
probably relate to this. One of the survival strategy subroutines I developed turned into a hypervigilance. So,
Mm.
like you with your father, as a boy, when it was 5:55 p.m. in the evening,
Yeah,
my father would start to come home, and I can tell from the way his feet hit the floor in the hallway whether it
yeah,
was going to be a good night or a bad night.
1,000%. You described
Right.
my 6 p.m. The heart would start to accelerate, walk in the house, and what is going to happen next?
Okay. So I'm going to say this. I'm with you, brother.
Mm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And that subroutine, what's going on? What's happening? I would alter and shapeshift depending on the footfall.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. Now, like a lot of subroutines, it became a superpower. I was an awesome journalist in my 20s because I could read people. I was
Hmm.
an awesome investor because I could read people. I am an awesome coach because I could read people,
Hmm.
right? Now, all of that ends up, and I talk about this in my first book, Reboot, really around a core question that my psychoanalyst helped me try to understand, which I think you'll relate to. And the question is, how have I been complicit, not responsible, for creating the conditions of my life? Complicit, meaning like accomplice, not responsible, meaning like setting me up for guilt.
Hmm. Hmm.
So just like you and I have this sort of hypervigilance, this capacity to sort of understand what's going on in a kind of eerie way, like a sixth sense kind of way.
Hmm.
One of the things that can happen is that can create a little bit too much sensitivity to what's happening around me. Hence the need to go into solitude. Hence the need to go into these places. Now, part of what I try to do as a coach is in this better humans make better leaders prep
Hmm.
issue is that clients will often come to me and say, we have trouble with trust in the organization.
Right.
And I'll say, well, are you telling each other the truth? Oh, no, no. We don't trust each other, so we don't tell each other the truth.
Hmm.
And when the most powerful person in the organization is super hyper vigilant and can't trust, all of a sudden or can't tell the truth because they're always
Hmm.
shape shifting, all of a sudden we have a trust problem. Okay. So that was Reboot. That is the company. That is what I do. That is what my colleagues do. We focus on that.
Hmm.
With
Cool.
Reunion, what I did was I turned that lens from an inward only space to an outward only space. And I asked the question, what is a leader's responsibility in a world filled with systemic othering? What is my responsibility? What is my complicity
Hmm.
in a world where people literally, Greg, we're at each other's throats?
Yep. Yep.
And
People
if
are.
better humans are going to make better leaders, then how does a better human respond to that? Now I'll shut up.
Sure. No, no, that was great. I agree. Everyone is walking in ready and armed with metaphoric bullets to just come into scenarios with accusation, with attack, with defense.
Exactly.
Um, and look, as you're saying, the world, social media, just everything isn't helping. I had this conversation the other day. I said, the biggest problem in the world today is the debate, the dialogue has been lost. Like once
Mm-hmm.
upon a time, you would sit down at a table, be like, I totally disagree with you. Good conversation. Let's break bread, and you would move on. Today, it is there's an unwillingness to receive and to hear in some capacity. So I wanted to ask you, what is the better leader's responsibility?
Well, it won't surprise you that. So there's a term I use in my work, and the term is radical self inquiry.
Hmm.
It's that internal, like, why do I do what I do? Or to
Hmm.
use your example, why do I respond with outrage when I encounter someone with whom I disagree?
Hmm.
What is going on there?
Hmm.
Right? And so what I argue is that the first responsibility is to, in effect, do the work that I suggest in my first book. What's going on with me?
Hmm.
So that I can kind of lay the groundwork to listen to other people. Or to use the metaphor that I use, you made the point that we've lost dialogue. I would expand upon that and say, we don't listen to each other.
Hmm. Hmm.
And worse, Greg, we don't even
Hmm.
listen to ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. Or I'll add to that, I'll expand upon the listening. I think we do listen, but we listen through the ears of judgment, right?
Right,
So with
right.
ourselves, we're hard on ourselves because we're judging ourselves, usually because of our perceptions and expectations. But with others, as we're listening to them, we're like internally just arguing, shooting, discounting, pushing back on everything that they said. It's a joke. Someone comes home and says, I got a speeding ticket. And before they finish the sentence, you're like, well, have you seen how fast you drive? I'm surprised you don't get more. It's like this zinger that comes right out, right?
Right.
I also really relate to what you talked about with the self and then the other. In my language, we call it who am I, who are they? But
Mm-hmm.
when we look at emotional intelligence, the exercise of self-awareness, which is pillar one for EQ, is really a hard pill to swallow, right? It is
Mm-hmm.
work. It's a responsibility that you need to look inwards, not from the lens of look how great I am, but from where is this dysfunctional and where is my responsibility? We were talking about how dad's footsteps would you would hear the footsteps and what kind of day it is. I can't tell you how many times I've been on my way home from the office and I've pulled over on the street just before I pull in my driveway and just did a little bit of a breathing exercise. It's called
Mm-hmm.
3-2-5. 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 1 minute. And why? Because I don't want to walk into the house with that energy, right? With that intense, like boom. And it's been a practice that I still do to this day. I don't even know if my family knows I do it. They still think I'm crazy.
So I just want to pause and I just want to let you know that I hear you as a fellow father
Yeah,
and I see what you're doing and you're breaking a pattern that you learned as a kid.
trying to, trying to.
And that's a good man.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully being a better human,
Hopefully
right?
being better fathers than what we had.
Correct, correct. At least better tomorrow than we were today.
Amen, brother. Yeah.
Cool. So, by the way, I could see why you're such a powerful coach, man. This was the universe leading you down this path, to really work and coach others. This is what coaching is about. I think in the world that we live in today, there's so much nonsense out there. It's kind of hard to sift through the noise and really have reputable coaches. And there's the certified coaches, which I cringe at because anyone could go do the certification. Right? It's not that hard. Anyone could go into a coaching situation and just ask questions, right? Those leading questions. But it's different. There's a massive difference between, moving someone, getting someone to reflect, to act, to shift. It's hard work, man. And there's only a few out there that I think can really do it. So I'm
I
glad to
think that,
have met you,
yeah,
really.
well, and the feeling is mutual. I think that what I've been doing this now for about 25 years.
Mm,
And I think that the difference, the thing that you're seeing, and I understand the point you're making about certification and that whole experience. I think the issue is we are all responsible for doing our own work,
hmm
and um, there are differences between people who have done their work and people who haven't done their work. And I
Correct.
think that's what you're identifying. And
Correct.
so what's happening is, through this screen, through Zoom, your nervous system is looking at my nervous system. My nervous system is looking at your nervous system and saying, we may use slightly different words, but there's kinship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so all of a sudden we can both settle in and go, oh, I know this person.
Right.
And this person is safe to be with. And what, for anyone who's listening, I would say that's really what you're looking for in someone who's going to be a guide, a mentor, a coach, whatever language you want to use. And
Right.
they're all very different functions. Look for people who have done their work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, very true. I interviewed this guy, Andrew Daniel, really brilliant dude. He talks a lot about exactly what you just said, which is the problem with personal development is people get caught up in the exercise of doing the course and not the actioning and the following through. And people get lost, right? Because they're like, it just the lens becomes the exercise is doing the learning itself. I often say to people in my class, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to unlearn a bunch of shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be the real work we're going to do is we're going to not just learn some fancy new stuff. It's about
Mm-hmm.
really, it's as much as it's about learning, it's about unlearning. And that's hard, man. That's really, really hard, right?
Well, the subtitle of my first book,
hmm
Read It, is Leadership in the Art of Growing Up.
Love it.
And and people laugh and I say,
It's
well,
true.
why is it so difficult for us to have good leadership? Because this
Why do you think?
process,
Yeah.
well, because this process of being a better human, of being a
hmm
grown up,
hmm
is fucking hard.
Right.
And
Right.
it requires us to unlearn old subroutines. It requires us to look fiercely in the mirror and say, wait, I'm the one who's creating this condition. I'm the
hmm
one who's adding to the stress. I'll tell you a quick story. We do these immersive boot camps, and one time this guy came to one of the boot camps, and um, he came with a very specific question. He had a son of a bitch, excuse my language, head of sales, and he was
hmm
greedy, and it was driving him crazy. And the first night, I'm reading poetry, I'm walking around without shoes. We're sitting in a circle. You know the scene.
Yeah, right, right.
And he's just squirming. He is just so mad at me. Like, I have a problem. I need to work on this. Okay. So 2 days go by and we're finally talking. And, I had said to him that night, look, you stay, because he was threatening to leave. I said, if you stay and you don't get anything out of this, I'll give you your money back. So just stay and you'll get a nice weekend in a nice location. So 2 days go by and we start talking about shadow.
Mm,
And we start talking about the disowned parts of himself. And
right.
he's like really pissed at me. He's just squirming up and down. What does this have to do? I still have this problem. And I said, well, who hired him? He sort of paused. And I said, okay, he's greedy. Tell me about greed. And he's still like, what? And I said, tell me about the promise you made when you were a kid. And then his eyes went wide. And he starts telling a story about being hungry and cold and having run away from home at 13 years old and becoming addicted to alcohol and swearing that he would never be poor.
Yeah.
I said, dude, all you did was outsource to this other guy your need to have enough toys.
Hmm.
He's just living out your dream.
Hmm.
You actually have to take back that part of you. So you know the language I'm talking.
Hmm.
And to your earlier point, this typically is not the language of personal development. This typically is not the follow these 5 steps and then you're going to be fine. It's actually more fierce. You actually have to look at your own shit,
Hmm.
your own contribution, so that you can then lift out of that and make more conscious choices.
Yeah. The original name for my company was called Personal Development Institute. And the reason it was changed was because no one bought. Go to these
Mm.
companies and be like, well, personal development, and be like, no, 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 we need management training, we need leadership training. So eventually the name was changed to Witz and Associates, right? Because
Mm.
that made us more corporate. And then that went
Mm.
to Witz Training and Development, and then that went to Witz Training. And then someone said
Mm.
to me, training is for dogs and education is for people.
Mm.
Uh,
I like that.
yeah, I liked it too. I was like, fuck it, change it to Witz Education. Bang.
Mm.
I'm the type of marketer that throws things up against the wall to see what sticks. But
Well,
that name is really sort of anchored to us, right? And then, one day, this was a few years ago, she's no longer with the company. One of the facilitators walked into our holiday party with shirts that said "Making Humans Better Humans." And we were like, what is this? She was like, well, this is actually what we do. If you notice, whenever we're in the room with people, it's always coming back to the personal stuff. And people say things like, man, this has made such an impact in my life, not an
mm.
impact in my work. The work is a bonus, right? And to exactly your point, if we could build the human being, if we can
Mm.
develop that self-awareness and that emotional management and the do that deep work that you're describing about, once that's done, now we can start to layer on a couple tools to help
Yeah,
us do this with other people, right? So
that's right. That's
if at
right.
the end of the day it's interpersonal, so let's spend that time. And for many years we shied away from it, right? Because it became this big thing of it's going to jeopardize us with the banks or the government and all that stuff. But they eventually we were like, fuck it. I mean, this is the work we do and let's double down in it. And that's really sort of where the message comes from, right? So but I find it serendipitous, maybe, is that the right word? Or universal. The universe has circled us two together at this time, December 5th, 2023. And you're like, by the way, I work on better humans to be better leaders. I'm like, whoa, I do the same thing. So it's cool, man. It's cool. And
There's a
yeah.
there's a wonderful teaching from the Buddha in which he said there are 84,000 doorways to the Dharma. And I
Mm,
love that phrase because he said 84,000, not 85, not 83, 84,000.
mm,
And there, we just have two different doorways to the same Dharma, to the
right,
same teaching.
right, right. I agree with you. You know, there's a lot of the stuff out there is overlapping,
Hmm.
or complementary, and it's not about
That's
the
right.
one versus the other. It's about utilizing the tools, right? It's like the
Well,
exercise
well,
again.
look to your earlier point about how some folks who want to help get
Hmm.
so fixated on their 5-step program, usually with an acronym,
Correct.
they 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 lose touch with the human being who's in front of them,
Correct.
who's struggling in their bespoke situation, right?
Yeah.
And I think when I think about them, I can relate to it. I can have empathy for it because I think behind that, the facilitator, the coach, is anxious, and what they're doing is they're relying on the the sheet music to tell them
Hmm.
how to play, not their own feel for the music.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
not. They're so nervous about not getting it right
Right.
that they actually drop the person in front of them.
Correct. Correct. Whenever we've looked for facilitators, the first thing we've looked for is the person, you know,
Mhm.
i.e. you. That's a perfect example. Let's say you were going to come in and be part of the crew, right? Getting you up and running on the content is the easy part, right? But who you are and how you work that sheet of music, that content,
Mhm.
how you weave the concepts together through your stories, through your delivery, through your coaching is the difference between a great facilitator and just an average one, right?
Right.
It's the worst answer I get in some of these interviews because we get calls a lot. Like as a training business, we'll often get the
Mhm.
LinkedIn message, which is, "Hi, I'm a facilitator. I'd be interested in, repping." So what's the
I know.
interest or
I know those messages.
right? Why do you want to facilitate? And the number one wrong answer is I love helping people. And I
Right.
think to myself, it's so selfish of you to say that because it's an ego thing, right? I think, what people got to be careful of as coaches and as facilitators is your narcissism goes up when you give someone advice or you give them direction and they do it. And they come back and they say, wow, I did the thing that you told me to do. We go, fucking look at that. How great I am, right? I'm so intelligent and smart and I'm a great coach. And that in itself is problematic, right? So, but the
The
best
same is
answers I
true for a CEO, by the way.
Right, exactly, exactly. The best answers I get are things like, you know what, I fell into this, or I've gone through my own journey, or, I work this tool. Even I'm really good at, distilling complicated things into a very simplistic way for people. That I could go, okay, let's lean into all of this, right? So cool. Jerry, let me ask you this. Tell us a little bit about. Let's come back to your book, and then I'll preview this at the end of each episode. We come to the most important question, which is, what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow? So I'll let that simmer with you for a second. But some thoughts about your new book, Reboot. If what could people expect if they were going to pick up a copy, and what would people maybe be looking for to get out of? What would be some of the reasons people would want to pick up your book?
Well, the new book, again, just to clarify, is Reunion.
Sorry,
Um,
reunion.
that
My
that
bad.
that's all right. That's all right. I've already been in discussions with my agent and editor about the next book, and yes, it's going to be titled after an R, so I'm
Okay,
always on brand.
triple R's, right? Triple R's. It's like,
um, I think the way to think about Reunion. Someone wrote to me this weekend after reading it. A friend that I did a podcast interview with just yesterday, and he said, "This is really good, and it's really hard. It's a challenging book." But it's challenging, hopefully, it's challenging in the way that we're talking about that personal development work. Um, I set out to try to write a book that would help answer the question of what is a business leader's responsibility in a world filled with pain. because the message that we constantly get is, well, that's outside the office door.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, Slack channels are filled with people saying, we have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if it's about a war in the Middle East. I don't care if it's about gun violence. I don't care. People are hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And those of us who are privileged to have power, as Spider-Man's uncle said to him, with great power comes great responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we hold that dilemma? And what I tried to do was, and this is embedded in the word reunion, what I tried to do was lay out a process, not a formula that is formulaic, but just sort of a process, which I think you'll relate to, which is that we need to reunite with the parts of ourselves that have been disowned, with the stories of our ancestors that we have forgotten, and usually hidden behind a sort of myth,
Mm-hmm.
right? As one of my colleagues who wrote one of the essays in the afterwards asked, she was talking about growing up with a family that was obsessed with their family tree. And she identifies as queer. And she
Mm-hmm.
said, just a simple question: what happened to my queer ancestors? Because we pretend they don't exist,
Mm-hmm.
and we've sort of dismembered them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I hope people understand about the new book, is that
Cool.
it's an attempt to sort of move into this sort of deeper reunion
With oneself.
with oneself, with one's past, with one's ancestors, so that I can then lay the groundwork for my reunion with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you also host a podcast called the Reboot Podcast.
Right. Right.
All
That we've
right.
been doing that for about 10 years now. So
Cool. And you talk a lot about this kind of stuff and interview amazing people that also add to this message.
mhm.
Very cool. Okay, so besides the Reboot podcast, if people wanted to find out and get more access or wanted to pick up your books, Reunion being the latest book, which is Leadership and the Longing to Belong, and your original book, which was released in 2019, Reboot: Leadership and the Art of Growing Up. Love that. Where can they find those copies?
The best place would be just simply reboot.io. Reboot.io. Yeah.
Cool.
Everything Reboot, Jerry, is all on that
Cool.
website.
Cool. And definitely, we're going to add all those links in the show notes as well. Jerry, we're coming to the top of the hour, man. This conversation flew by. We didn't even do a count-in today. It was just we started chatting, and then it's halfway through, and it's like, oh, by the way, maybe we should formalize this a little bit. But at the end of the episode, we come to the most important question, which is, what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow?
Well, the simplest thing I would say is there was a phenomena after I released Reboot, which is I would go around the world and I'd give these talks. And various people from wide variety of backgrounds would come up, they would read, they would have read the book, and they would say to me in one form or another, your story is my story.
Hmm.
And that is a very, very powerful experience. Think about the experience, Greg, you and I had.
Right.
Wait, that his father, my father, your story is my story.
Right.
And I would argue that what we need to do more than anything else is hear our stories and the stories of the other person, which means we really need to do that full body listening we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Not listening to fix, not listening to find the problem, but listening to find that empathetic bridge, that empathetic connection,
Mm-hmm.
so that together we can grow up.
Mm.
That's the wish.
It's awesome. I am thrilled to have connected and met you today. I think
Yeah.
someone asked me what's the best part about the podcast, and you get into all these different things, but really it's the opportunity to build connection and relationships, and you don't always have an opportunity. And I believe the universe brings us together in the way we need to be brought together as people. But this was awesome today. I really appreciate your time.
Well, and I appreciate the work you're doing in the world. Welcome to the Avengers.
Thank
There are
you,
a lot of
brother.
aliens we have to fight.
No problem. No problem. We could. I'm happy to be part of the team. I'm a fan of Marvels. Um, all right. So listen, you and I are going to continue chatting, but for the audience, we're going to have all of Jerry's handles and links in the show notes. So go and follow him on Instagram and LinkedIn. Check out reboot.io. That's where you can find all of his books and more information about some of the coaching. If you're ever interested, obviously, of having Jerry in as a speaker to your organization, go and look him up and get him booked. And that's it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. Stay happy, stay healthy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. The more we get this messaging out to the more people, the better. We will see all of you next week.
We'll see you soon. Take care.